Welcome back to the second podcast conversation for the month of July 2023 on the Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self Care for Women of Color podcast. I am your host, Dr. Tony G. Alvarado, and I'm so excited to welcome you and to invite you to listen in, take notes, join in this dialogue that we're going to have today. As I said in our previous episode this month, I'm very excited because we have entered into the second half of the year. And it is important that as we move forward in the year, that we really, really hone in on what it means to harmonize our lives, to live harmonious lives, to practice healthy self-care practices that lead to holistic lives, harmony, fitness, wellness, all the things that make for us living a lifestyle of self-care. And so I'm excited about our dialogue partner for this episode, who is going to help us drill down even deeper as we continue this conversation throughout this month. So we'll be right back with my next guest right after this. All right. I have in the podcast studio with me. She is not a stranger. She has been on the podcast at least two other times. Seems like I like this, Jean. So you were with me in the first year, the second year, and now the third year. All right.
Yes,
I
yes.
love it. I love it. And we've done so many other things and worked together in this space. And so I'm so appreciative to have with us again Dr. Jeanne Porter King. She is an author, a consultant, a pastor, a leadership coach, specializing in women's leadership. She is a trusted teacher and a guide who has taught leadership at both the undergrad and seminary levels. Dr. Porter King is the founder and president of the Transporter Group, Inc., a consulting company focused on leadership development. She is passionate about developing existing and emerging women leaders. Her goal is to encourage and empower more Black women to lead well. She lives in South Holland, Illinois, with her husband, Pastor Carl E. King. And I'm delighted today and super excited because we are going to be discussing her new book, Leading Well, a Black woman's guide to holistic barrier breaking leadership. And so will you help me welcome our guest, Dr. Jeanne Porter King, the author of Leading Well, Black Woman's Guide to Holistic Barrier Breaking Leadership. Thank you for being with us today, Jeanne.
Tony, it is absolutely my pleasure. And as you said, I think this is a third in a row, every year of the pandemic and now beyond. We're continuing to partner at least once a year. And I'm always grateful to be on your podcast show.
And I'm grateful for first of all, for our friendship, our sisterhood, and our common passion and desire to be whole ourselves and to hold one another accountable for being whole. We check on one another outside of this.
We do.
We text or we call. We like, hey girl, how you doing?
Yes.
We've shared similar experiences. Now both of our mothers have transitioned.
Yes.
And
yes.
We've been there for each other in our grief journeys.
Yes.
And it's life-giving. I appreciate our life-giving relationship.
I do too. And it's it's nothing but God. We started on a path on a whole nother program partnering together.
Yeah.
Had no idea we would literally walk that journey of
Mhm.
grieving our mothers within a year of each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes.
Right. As the young people say, life be lifing.
Be life in.
Life be lifing. But yeah. And so, Jean, you've written another book.
Yes.
You know, you're my shero when it comes to writing. I wish I could crank out books like you. Uh, but you've written another book, and I'm excited about this book because I know how passionate you are. I know your life, and I know that this book is, I believe that ministry flows out of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
whole no be do triad,
Mm-hmm.
knowing God, and which informs our being of who we
Mm-hmm.
are. And then what we do flows out of that wellspring. And so I know that this book is going to be a blessing because I know how you live your life. And so yeah, so I just want to read a little bit of what the media, the press kit that's out there about the book. I'm read a little bit of that, and then I want you to we'll delve in a little bit more in the press kit that you put out. It says Black women are gifted, prepared, and poised to lead, but they often experience resistance both from external forces and from within. Many feel like outsiders in their own companies, churches, and communities. They feel the pressure to be all things to all people and to prove themselves again and again to be worthy of following. With 70% of C suite executives seriously considering resigning for a job that better supports their well being in 2022, Black leaders need to be equipped with tools to successfully lead from a place of health and wellness. They must not sacrifice their health and well being at the altar of corporate and institutional systems. There it is.
Bang, right?
Boom, right? And Jean, let me say this: that right the episode before this conversation, I just did a conversation. I'll invite you to go and listen to it. And it with one of my sorors, and she's working on her PhD, and she's
Mm-hmm.
studying the idea of Black girl magic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's actually deconstructing the whole idea. And her premise is that Black girl magic is just the strong Black woman syndrome dressed up.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about this very thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I was so excited because I was like, wow, this is just this whole month is really, really calling us to a whole nother level of what it means to harmonize our lives. My phrase, my
Mm-hmm.
premise, and your idea of leading well,
Mm-hmm.
her idea of deconstructing Black girl magic. What
Mm-hmm.
is it really, and how it's injurious to us, and how we live, and how we show up in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think your book is right on time.
It has flowed out of a journey, my own journey. Um, I actually started more intentionally on pulling together the wellness, wholeness component with leadership when two very dear friends of mine passed at what I would say, right, prematurely. They were top of their games, seasoned Black Christian women, women of faith who led at a university level, another in a nonprofit, and just had a stellar journey. And they died within a month of each other, and it shook me. They died of cancers that were diagnosed in late stages and took them quickly. And I just began to see it as a wake up call that they were not the only ones leading in this way, whether we call it the Black girl magic. As you know, I'm a big fan of Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes and her writing. She calls it
Mhm.
the strong Black woman, but she links them together. So there's a difference in being a strong a black woman who is strong, but the strong black woman that she literally puts it together, scrunches it. She calls it a literary scrunching, that has the assumption that they're to take care of everyone, not take care of themselves, will go above and beyond. And I, in this book, unpack it as trying to move from leading like a superwoman to leading as a well woman. And as I look at the outside pressures, now, you know my story. I'd hope your listeners and your audience know more of it. I have led in the marketplace for almost 30 years now, as well as in the church. And oftentimes, though we know these messages are here from scripture about who we are, I totally agree with you. Not only do we minister from who we are, we lead from who we are. But the pressures on the outside to keep up with performance, to prove ourselves, and we face microaggressions, racism, sexism, that we sometimes go on automatic pilot to do what we do, as we say. We're going to make it happen. But it's having an effect on ourselves, our souls, that I believe is showing up in unhealthy practices that we've got to address.
It and I it's so funny because when you were talking about your friends who passed and how that was a wake up call for you in our previous conversation before this, my soror and I were just talking about um, uh, um, one of our sorors who suddenly passed away, and we were just talking about even in the way we do even those type of things, the way we lead in organizations, things of that nature. And are we really realizing what it means? What are we really doing? And what are we sacrificing?
What are we sacrificing? I tell the book is based on the premise that number one, as Black women of faith, God has equipped and called us with gifts. And really, often our leadership gifts look different, we show up differently. And the vast majority of the world can't handle the way we lead. And think about it, corporate structures and even church structures were, the church was formed by Jesus Christ. So I'm not talking about the church. I'm talking about
You're
these
talking
human
about
systems.
what we have come up with.
These human systems, but even corporations, again, formed and structured by people who didn't look like us, weren't for us. And now that we're there, we're kind of sometimes the, antithesis of what they define as leader. And so we show up. I talk about the journey of number one, being seen as outsider women. For the longest, it was how we showed up, whether it was our hair, our skin tone, our voice. And of all women, because I've been doing women's leadership work now since 2004, so almost 20 years, that my company has helped organizations, large scale Fortune 100 companies, develop their pipeline of women to advance into senior leadership or executive leadership.
Okay.
And for the longest, I'd see women coming to those programs that didn't look like me. And even with the Supreme Court cutting down affirmative action, the reality, a lot of these affirmative programs have helped white women and not helped Black women and other women of color to the same extent. And I promised myself when I get to a point, I was going to do programs for us to help even, increase our numbers and at least our awareness. And God has even shifted that. The goal isn't for women to climb up into a higher level corporate ladder unless that's the call on your life. That's where you feel we don't want you to do it at the expense of your soul. What shall a woman gain if she gain the whole world
And
and
lose
lose her soul? And
lose
that
her health,
soul,
lose her mental health,
that's
lose
the
her
soul,
family.
mind, emotion,
Yeah.
will, relationships. And so, yeah, this book is, I tell my own story of very early on, because I was catapulted into corporate leadership very early on. I was traveling. It looked, very attractive early on, and it was, especially that 20-something-year-old, to my early 30s, and began to feel that pressure early on. And God, in writing this book, took me back to each of those junctures and said, you've been on a leading well journey all this time. And in each juncture where I've had you make a move or a shift that was in service to your call and your health, that was this leading well journey. So he's now given me the language to put that journey together to help others, especially the next generation of women leaders that you and I are mentoring and working with, so they don't have to go through the same process that I went through.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, your book, you talk about the dual assaults between racism and sexism, and you encourage, you give hope and encouragement for us
Mm-hmm.
as we enter into these spaces, or we exist in these spaces. So why is spiritual wellness the most important leadership quality for us as Black women? Because to me, that's where the anchor is, right?
Yeah, and it is the anchor. As I was, um, the book is kind of a play on words. Leading from the well. Leading well is about leading from the
Hmm.
well of the Holy Spirit, right?
Hmm.
And so as I looked at wellness models and frameworks like the Global Wellness Institute and a number of different ones, the beauty of wellness frameworks is that it talks about the various dimensions of our lives being
Hmm.
interrelated and integrated.
Hmm.
So when we talk about mental wellness, emotional wellness, vocational wellness, those are integrated,
Hmm.
almost like a cluster of grapes that you go to pull
Hmm.
one. You've ever been at a reception, you try to get one grape out and the whole cluster comes.
Because
That's
right.
how our lives are. It's interconnected, it's dynamic. And so I love that idea of wellness to show the holistic part of it, right? And so these models often would include then spiritual wellness as one of 6 or 9 or 12, whatever the number was. For me, the issue wasn't the number, it was the priority placed on spiritual wellness. It was one of equals. And I believe for the woman of faith, spiritual wellness is the core.
Okay.
And I take that out of First Thessalonians 5:23, when
Yeah.
the Lord says,
Uh-huh.
Paul, the writer, prays, I will that the God of peace
Mhm.
sanctify you wholly,
Fully.
your
And that's
whole
full
spirit, soul, and
spirit.
body.
Mm-hmm.
So, what the Lord gave me in conjunction with the story of the woman at the well, because that's another outsider woman. She was an outsider to Jesus's day. And Jesus intentionally went through Samaria to bring the Samaritans into his global mission.
Yeah.
And she has also been preached as an outsider to this day. I exegete and show how people still teach and preach her as a hoochie woman and not look at the culture and the
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal system she was locked into, and some of her status at the time that Jesus talks about. I
Mm-hmm.
see us as outsider women today needing to be at the same well she was at. And if that's the case, then our spiritual well being is the core. From that, then would flow the other dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I didn't see in a lot of these models that I think are apropos for Black women, Black Christian women especially, is a wellness or a wholeness around our personal identity. So
Mm.
much of our outsider status bears on being assaulted by racism and sexism around our very being. Again, we had to have a Crown Act that legitimized us wearing our hair in professional settings in the way that it grows out of our roots. And don't get me wrong, some people have straight hair that grows out their roots. I've relaxed my hair for years, and as I got older, it was getting thinner. And I remember having to have a conversation with my top client. She was a Jewish woman. So at some point she got it, but I was like, now look, I'm about to go natural. I did not need to lose business. But it's a
Right.
shame I felt I had to even have that conversation, right? And so many ways, the beauty aesthetics of the dominant culture of the world have always been opposite of who we are. And
Mm-hmm.
so personal identity wellness or well-being. I have a whole chapter in there in which we affirm who we are as God's women, Black women, called and loved by God,
Mhm.
created in God's image,
Mhm. Mhm.
called to lead wherever God chooses. So
Mhm.
that's one distinction of this wellness model. The second is we draw resources from our cultural heritage. So when
Mhm.
you have a dominant culture that talks about wellness, you don't have to talk about white supremacy because that's, ingrained in who you
Right.
are.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we stand on the shoulders of Black women and men, but this book is really about Black women, but Black men get featured in here too,
Yeah.
from our culture who fought for freedom and justice.
Mhm.
That was a part of our well-being also. And so we draw from those cultural stories also.
Yeah.
And, even I share one about my granny used to talk about, you got to know what you know. Honey, that notion of what she said, know what you know, or know that you know, that was that discernment that we bring with us into these corporate and
Mhm.
institutional spaces. And they, the outsiders, will try to make us doubt the very wisdom God has placed in us. And we
Mhm.
know when stuff is going down. And this is part of our well-being of trusting that.
Yeah. Yeah. Trusting what's in us.
Trusting what God has placed in us.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
then the other parts of my model do align. So those are three, on the spiritual category: the spiritual well-being, personal and identity well-being, cultural well-being, that aligns with that spirit in First
Okay.
Thessalonians 5:23.
Mhm.
And then in the soul realm, I do emotions, mental wellness, relational wellness or well-being. And then in the body, we talk about physical well-being, environmental well-being, and vocational well-being. And really, it's not going to be one of these heavy reads. That the model is so implicit in the story, because what I unpack, and to use your soror's language, I deconstruct the story of the woman at the well. You're going to see her in such a different light, because you're going to see ourselves in that story.
Oh,
Want
wow.
to see how Jesus shows up to say, look, because people ignore the wisdom she brought to the
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
from her own cultural heritage.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
he comes, here he is,
Mhm.
this Jewish man. She doesn't know who he is yet. And he says, can you give me some water? She's like, I'm a Samaritan woman and you're Jewish. What are you doing asking me? You're breaking and violating all these cultural
Yeah.
mores.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
her words, I am a Samaritan woman, comes to bear on her agency, her efficacy, that she says, in this space, in this moment, I have the power. This is my ground, right? And when we can show up like that, like, wait a minute, y'all, now, this may be your name may be on the door, but I am a Black woman called by God. And if I've been called here, then I'm showing up, as an agent of God.
Okay.
I've got some
Okay.
efficacy and
Okay.
agency here. And we know that. And the realest story for me, again, I coach women who are in corporate. I left, and part of the most liberating thing for me was when God allowed me to start my own business. I am celebrating 22 years.
Wow.
And so I think there are so many possibilities for us. But as I say in this book, we have to start with reimagining our leadership. And we
Mm.
don't have to do it in ways that deteriorate our health, our well being, and everything else in our lives.
So then, okay, so when this whole authenticity, showing up, knowing what's
Hmm.
in us, trusting what's in us, self
Hmm.
agency, how does that practically work itself out according to leading well? How does
Hmm.
it practically work itself out in the way we care for our spirit, soul, and body?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So the book, first of all, is a reframing of our thinking.
Okay.
And again, the title is Leading Well: A Black Woman's Guide to Holistic. That's what that authenticity we're
Mhm.
talking about, that whole spirit,
Uh-huh.
soul, and body. Barrier breaking leadership. So the first barrier we're breaking through is our own thinking
Oh,
about who we are as leaders.
good,
So
good.
long, leadership has been defined in ways that when I did my doctoral dissertation 25 years ago now, what
Mhm.
I saw was what's called the leadership discourse. That's the body of literature that talks about, frames, researches, adds to the understanding of leadership, it was dominated by white men. And when women in our, when we read about women who were doing things that you and I would call leadership back in the day, they wouldn't even bring the title of leader. It was because they saw it as something so male infused.
It was
So
very
they could be facilitators or community activists or agents. And I argued there that those are leadership roles, and those behaviors that they were enacting were the same as men were acting, and they deserve the title of leader. And oftentimes, even the ways we lead may look differently. That doesn't mean it's not leadership. So you get the point.
Yeah.
And so the way that ends up playing out in this book is this story unravels and unpack one outsider for us to relate to our own stories. And first barrier is the breakthrough. Second is it plays out in showing the statistics of, number one, the ways in which leading in unhealthy ways have had an ill or deleterious effect on our health.
Okay.
And I share a story about, I was doing this corporate training program, and I must have talked about my age. And at the end, this woman, a number of the women came up. It was an insurance agency, majority white. And one young white woman who was originally from the South came up and said, I was a makeup artist for years. And when you said you were such and such years old, I know working on Black skin that Black don't crack. And I, first of all, was a little amused that she would appropriate our phrase, right?
Wow.
Black don't crack, right? But more importantly, as I look at the research, and I share this in the book, that actually Black does crack, Tony. Black cracks from the inside out. And then we are finding
wait. It cracks from the inside out. Don't miss that.
Don't miss that.
Don't miss that. Come
the
on.
effects of us putting on that superwoman, Black girl magic, strong Black woman ethos, putting that S on our chest and barreling through by hook or by crook, by sheer force. It number one is increasing our stress, and those stress related illnesses are showing up in other diseases that are age related. We're prematurely aging, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So it is cracking from the inside out. And so what we have to do with leading well is say, we're going to the well and reframing all of this from the inside out. We're healing because what God gave me is,
and that's what Jesus said to the woman when you were talking about that inside out. Remember, he said, the water that I'm giving you is going to be a well springing up, coming out of you. And so that meant there was an inside job.
It's an inside job, sis.
It's an inside job. And this whole leading well is about what's happening to us internally, mentally, what's going on with us, emotionally, what's going on with us, spiritually, and even physically, what is happening with us internally. And are we paying attention?
Yes.
Right. And when you talk about leading, when you're talking about the way we lead, if we're honest, most people, when we think about leadership and leading, for most people, it's about doing.
And in response to the outside world forcing you to do,
exactly.
There you go.
About doing rather than being. Right. And so what I see from your book is this idea of being. Ashley Edler, I think is how you pronounce her name, Edler. She is a psychologist that I've read and studied and follow her writings. And she talks about this whole self-care. And she said, she calls it being self-centered. And when we think about self-centered, we think, she talks about being a self-centered woman. And when you hear that, automatically something kind of grates you because you think, oh, what is that? Being self-centered. When we tell people they're self-centered, there's a very negative connotation to that. But she turns that upside down. She flips it. And she says being self-centered is about being anchored, about being stable,
grounded.
And she says self-centered women are their own North Stars. And she said that what really people who are North Stars are people who we get direction from. People, a North Star is something that guides, is something that leads, right? And so she
Mhm.
said, when we are this North Star, when we are self-centered, we become North Stars to people, whereby people can look at our lives, and it's not
Mhm.
about what we do so much, but it's about who we
Who
are.
we are.
They get
Yes.
comfort and leadership and guidance from.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so
And
that's
that's the
what I hear in what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And and your question was, how does this play out for leaders? That's it. First of all, as leaders, leaders are people who go before others, and help bring others along. And we have had modeled for us from our mothers,
Mhm,
grandmothers, other, women figures in our lives who did barrel through, and they had to for their generation. But they also had their own sister girl network. They had, I remember my mother and her. I used to say, my mother took a lot of things as she worked, even in the marriage, you name it, and didn't complain. But the reality is, she had her girlfriends to talk to. She then began to share things, especially as she came in, and I had the privilege of caring for her in her last
mhm, mhm,
2 years of her life in my home. I saw a strength of a woman. She was the face of resilience,
mm,
and what we, I believe, are being called to by God is to get into this place of the spirit where we are healed from the brokenness caused by broken systems. We
mm,
have led in places that have counted as us outsiders. We have been told we're the angry Black woman.
mm,
We are too forthright.
mm,
We're prepared, researched by many of the talent for Center for Talent Innovation has a new name now, but they showed that especially in corporate settings, Black women were far more prepared to step
mm,
into leadership, but
mm,
were usually the last asked, were looked over. And
mm,
so I unpack even 4 tropes that we are
mhm,
fighting against,
mhm,
whether it's in corporations or the church. One is that invisibility, being looked over,
mm,
or some of these institutions touting they're led by Black men and missing that Black women play a critical role. The second string leadership team, you and I've talked about it many times. I'll let your
mhm,
readers listen up for that. And then this whole notion of, again, the angry Black woman. I scrunch that together, much as Dr. Shaniqua does with the strong Black woman. I talk
uh-huh,
about the AEW. There's not that much anger in the world, girl. First of all, anger is an emotion,
mhm,
and our emotions have been given to us by God
mhm,
to be cues and clues of what's going on around us and within us, right?
mhm.
And as humans, anger is a part of the human condition.
It
But
is.
the reality is, when we are forthright, we are often assertive, but assertiveness is not the same as aggressiveness. That's a leadership lesson right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Women who are either already in leadership or aspiring to leadership that are assertive. Assertiveness means I respect and value my own voice, myself, but I also respect and value yours. So I will assert my opinion and will listen to yours, and
Right,
we'll need to come to a
right.
meeting of the mind.
Let's reason together. Right.
Let's reason together. Aggressiveness says, I respect myself and value and power, and I don't respect yours. So I will overpower you. I will force you. I will dominate or bully you. That's not what we're doing when we show up. But because we've been positioned as outsiders in our very being,
When we do show up,
we,
then
we
we're labeled
right.
aggressive rather than assertive.
Right, exactly. So, right there's a teaching lesson. I've asked your listeners, take that away the next time you or another Black woman has been labeled as aggressive. You take a moment to unpack that. So, what we also talk about in the book is you can't let people cause you to react. We are responsible women. We have the
Mhm,
ability to
mhm,
respond, which means when you've spent time at that well, you don't let these things just put you on automatic pilot to react. And so you have a conversation. Well, help me to understand what she did that led you to label her
Mhm.
as aggressive. Because very seldom are they going to say this to our face. They're going to say it about somebody else. So we become advocates for ourselves and for one another. What led you to believe that? If a man had said the same thing, would you have seen it as aggressive? So here's what we ought to do. We ought to hold a consistent standard for men and women when we're making these judgments. And
Mhm.
it's not helpful to continue to label women, Black women particularly, with these worn out tropes.
Mm,
So
mhm.
that's a very practical example that comes out of the book, in which we then are galvanizing around these truths that we are called by God to lead wherever God so chooses, whether it's in the marketplace or in the ministry. We are called by God, and we're going to do this now in ways that we do it well. And by leading well, I mean leading both effectively, of course, but
Mhm.
leading from this place of wholeness.
Wholeness.
Mhm.
Wholeness. Whew, girl, this is good. I cannot wait to get my hands on this book. I love the shift that you are making. I love how you are shifting the mind set, and hopefully that will, well, not hopefully, I know that as we read it and we take it in and we continue to drill down and have these conversations and these communities that we're creating, like what I've created here, what
Mhm.
and the self-care network, and the work that you're doing with the transporter group and the wellness groups and all the things that we've been talking about. um I'm believing that we're going to create something where we can save. I believe these things are saving lives.
Yes. Yes.
Honestly, honestly, I
Yes.
believe that lives are being changed and we are saving lives. We're leading, we're showing up in different ways. And I think through our reading, through our writing, through our conversations like this, through the self care circles and wellness circles that we're building, we're really changing our community. And I believe that we're changing and shifting the paradigm for the women that are coming behind us.
Totally agree. I'm
Our
even think
nieces and our daughters and our
daughters,
granddaughters.
nieces,
Yeah.
younger
And
women we coach. I'm coaching a person now, again, would never share anything confidential, but just to see the shift after only like 4 sessions,
I do.
that she said, I've been giving my power away, because she would show up and she works in an a predominantly male environment. It put her on the defensive and she'd lash out. She'd be defending herself. I get it. Child, after a bit, she said, you know what? I've been giving my power away and it is costing me too much energy. Let's do this thing differently.
Doesn't it, when I tell you the joy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about the age either, because
Mm-hmm.
as you, I'm coaching a group of women, and the women in my group are the in the intentional self care program. The age ranges are different, um, and all of them are professional women, but in the ministry and marketplace. And one of the women in the group, um, she's a widow, and
Mm-hmm.
we've been looking at how with her, how grief, how
Mm-hmm.
her not managing or
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to her grief, how it has led to her over functioning at work.
Mm-hmm. Look at that connection.
And
Mm.
and so things like her not eating, and
Yes.
eating well, not cooking, and found out in our conversation one time, that her not eating was connected to her grief, in that
Mm-hmm.
cooking reminded her of her husband. And
Mm-hmm.
so because of that, she was not cooking, not eating healthy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Because she wasn't addressing the grief, she wasn't cooking, she wasn't, which meant she wasn't eating well, taking care of herself, and then it dominoed into some other health issues. But when we made that connection
Mm-hmm.
and looked
The
at it,
breaking free mentally first. Let me give you another quick two examples, and they show up in the book. And I've gotten permission for any story that's in there.
yeah,
It may not always use the real name, but the
yeah,
stories are real. One sister that I was coaching, what her breakthrough was, she recognized that, first of all, the colorism we have in our own culture, let alone in, corporate spaces.
Yes,
And she
Lord.
was a beautiful Black woman of darker hue. One of her parents always told her how Black she was, and you so Black, in a tone that made her feel that it was an ugliness. You know what the connection she made? Because of that insecurity around her skin tone, she showed up as a leader at work, overcompensating, being almost a bully, showing that she had all the right answers. And when she got that aha and recognized my team has wisdom, I can work in lead in far more of a power with mentality versus a power over. It changed the dynamic for her and her team. She began to get the results that she wanted. She had to make that connection that, wow, my insecurities anchored back to what I was told by one of my parents. And that's why, if you go back to my model, personal identity well-being is important for us as Black women, because, we have a range of hues. I affirm all of them. When I was growing up, mine was I have big full lips. Now there are people now trying to buy these, right? They're pumping and pumping. But in my neighborhood, I was teased for these big old lips. And the reality is, there's a lot of stuff we've got to come to grips with from our own community and
Yes.
culture that affirms whether we have straight, kinky, or curly hair.
No
We
matter
have
what color our skin is.
mocha or
Mhm.
cafe au lait skin tone. We are tall, whatever it is. We've been created in God's image. Look in the face of this. This is a woman created in God's image.
Yeah.
And when we
And when
come
we
to
get
love
that,
ourselves,
when
that
we get that,
self-love
yes.
has to start, even self-care has to come out of a self-love, right?
And here's the thing, and how it revolutionizes our community is that when I get it, then
Mm-hmm.
I pass that on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, you remember when Jesus told Peter, when you are converted, strengthen your brother.
Strengthen your brother.
And
Mm-hmm.
so it's the gift that I give to myself, but then it's the gift that keeps on giving, because then I can give that same gift to you, and I can give you permission to love yourself, and I can give you permission to take a break, and I can
Mm-hmm.
love you and give you opportunity. And I don't have to be all the answers and do all the things, as they say, and be all the things, as you know, now that's the new term. You all the things. No, I'm not all the things.
Mm-mm.
And it's
Mm-mm.
okay to not be all the things. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay for you not to be all the things. I just love what you're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
We can go on forever and ever and ever, but my son tells me that podcasts should not be very long, Mom. So, uh, Jeanne, how can people get your book? Please tell us.
Yes, there are a couple of ways. Number one is they can go to my website. You had it up, drjeanneporterking.com,
Mhm.
and you can click on books, Leading Well, or you can put in the URL slash leading hyphen well hyphen book, another slash, go straight to the page. There they will learn more about the book. They can also, if they pre-order it, I'm offering 3 freebie bonuses, because this will air before the book launches. The book launches August 15th, and we are here in July still
Uh-huh,
talking
uh-huh,
about this,
uh-huh.
so that they can get some freebies, download a couple of chapters, as well as a coaching video that I provide free, as well as the publisher will, for all those that sign up on my site, we will send out a link to get the audio book for free, because a lot of our leading women would rather listen to a book than read. So we give you an audio book. So that's number one. The other way is go directly to Amazon and or any of the booksellers that they prefer. Leading Well, the Black Woman's Guide to Holistic Barrier Breaking Leadership, and buy it, purchase it. You can always come back to the site and put in your receipt, and we'll give you that. I'm also on social media that I would love for them to
Yes, and I'm going to
follow.
put those up. And for those of you, let me just interject here. For those of you that may be listening rather than watching us on
Ah,
YouTube, I want you to go to my YouTube channel. as well. Like you said, some people, a lot of people listen to the podcast while they're walking or working. It's easier to just listen. But if
Mm-hmm.
you have opportunity, go to the YouTube channel as well, so that you can get some of these things, and you can see her banner scrolling across the screen, get the correct spelling of her name. She spelled
Mm-hmm.
Jeanne, Jeanne. And so just want to make sure, because sometimes people are looking for us and not able to spell our names correctly or whatever. So go to my YouTube channel, like, subscribe, share, so that you can watch these as well. I tell the women all the time, y'all veg out on TikTok and veg out on what's it, Netflix and all that. Veg out on the Harmonize Your Life podcast.
That's right.
Go from episode to episode on YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. So yeah, Jeanne. So tell us where we can find you on Facebook.
Facebook. The author page is author Jeanne Porter King.
Okay.
And then on Instagram, where they'll get a lot, especially for your listeners who are on Instagram, Dr. Jeanne Porter King.
Mm-hmm.
And
we are now on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter, Dr. Jeanne P. King.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of these sites, we will be providing content as we get, launch the book. I've actually amassed a great interest on LinkedIn. So thank you for showing that, because professional women who are on LinkedIn are waiting for this. They know, this kind of message. When I started doing this for women in general, they'd come to sessions and leave with, wow, it wasn't my imagination. I really was dealing with this. I'm not alone, but now I have strategies. And that's what I want women to know. We have some strategies in here, and I'm going to be creating a community, forming a book launch team that people can join. And we're for 4 weeks, I'm going to go live, read from the book, answer questions. And then I'm going to ask people, obviously, for reviews, but you get an opportunity to speak with the author about this book. And on launch day, we'll celebrate. And I'll be going to a number of cities with some book signings that I would love if your listeners are in any of the cities. Chicago, we're going to go to the East Coast. We'll be in Atlanta, Richmond, Dallas. And I'd love to meet.
Come to Atlanta, well, I'll get some women together and we'll come.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you so much.
Just give me those dates and we'll make it happen.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes. Awesome.
Good. Well, I am grateful again for those of you who are watching our podcast or listening. This is the Harmonize Your Life Conversations on Self-Care for Women of Color podcast with your host, Dr. Tony G. Alvarado. You can find this podcast on Apple, on Google, on Spotify podcast. You can also go to my YouTube channel at Dr. Tony G. Alvarado. I highly recommend you go there. We want to increase our subscribers to the YouTube channel, because when we do so, Google and YouTube are, YouTube and Google are the largest search engines. And so when you go there and you put in keywords like self-care, health, wellness, women, Black women, all the things that we've been talking about, this podcast will come up as a suggestion of one you should listen to. And the more people that are on there, the more our analytics go up on YouTube, the higher up we are in the search engine. You don't have to search 5 pages down or 13 pages down to find us. And so please help us do so by liking, subscribing, and sharing, commenting on this podcast when you see it and when you hear it. Please, because I believe that we are changing lives through these conversations. So go there and be a part of what God is doing here in the Self-Care Network. I also want to encourage women that are listening, join the Harmonize Your Life Women's Self-Care Network. You can do so by going to my website at drtonyalvarado.com. If you're interested in coaching and being developed in this area for greater strategies and accountability, partners and coaching in the area of self-care, health, wellness, fitness, you can apply to do the next group of the intentional self-care program, which we will launch our next group the beginning of 2024. Applications will be made available in the fall of this year. So if you're interested, email us at drtonyalvarado.com. Email me there. Email me at hello@drtonyalvarado.com and let me know, Dr. Tony, I want to be a part of the next intentional self-care program. All right, we've been talking with Dr. Jeanne Porter King on today, and I'm going to let her close us out by giving us one last word of encouragement. Dr. Jeanne, share one last word of encouragement for us as we sign off.
I sure will. And thank you again for having me, Dr. Tony. It's always a pleasure. To your listeners, I just want to say I believe God is calling us to a place in the spirit where we can be healed from the brokenness caused by broken systems. God is calling us to a place in the spirit where we can affirm our identity in God. God is calling us to a place in the spirit where we can ask for what we need, can perceive greater possibilities, can affirm what we know, and we can lead from that place. From there, we hear the voice of vocation clarifying our leadership purpose. From that place, we can reimagine how we lead, and we can lead from the light generated by God's love for us, and we can leave a legacy of leadership, of leading well for the next generation to lead from that same place of wholeness. God is calling us to this movement and to this place.
Wow. I hope you hear the call. And more importantly, I hope you show up and answer that call. The first step is getting that book. Get Dr. Jeanne Porter King's book, and let's read it together and let's lead well. I'm so excited. All right. Thank you for being a part of our July podcast conversations. We look forward to seeing you as you show up and lead well in the ministry, in the marketplace, on your jobs, wherever you are, in whatever space you're in. Let's just lead well. See you soon.